Hi there, I'm Scott Meyer with Artist Network, and what you are about to see is a live presentation by renowned painter and popular instructor Johannes Vloothuis. So Johannes is an instructor for these very popular events called paint-alongs, where viewers from around the world come together to follow along as Johannes completes a painting from start to finish in watercolor, in oils, and pastels. Now, he has helped literally thousands of students over the last decade and more to improve their paintings in a fun, engaging, and an easy way. So what you're going to see here is a sample of his teaching here to help you better understand ways that you can improve your own composition. So if you're looking to improve the design of your work and take your landscapes to the next level, this is a great place to start. So be sure to like and subscribe this video. Check out the link in the description below where you can stay up to date with new paint-along events so you can follow along with Johannes. These happen regularly, and we're very excited for you to join us. So without further ado, let's get to it.
Hi everyone, here's Johannes. Nice to see you all. I see some new names today and some people that go back years and years. Okay, my name is Johannes Vloothuis, and I am a professional artist, and I've been teaching for over 25 years and going into my 12th year with Artist Network. I have taught over 20,000 artists before over all these years. Lots of my students that go back 10 years are still with me, so that must account for something. So today we're going to do something that's going to be very good for some of you new ones, because you're going to get some information on principles of composition, and I'm sure you've never heard of, because I've read many books. I had a whole bookcase full of Northlight books and magazines and you name it, gone to workshops. And there are many things that are left out. And so I compiled some. This is going to be new information for you today. Okay, so let's just get right to it. And I also have a book that's published called Landscape Painting Essentials. You can find that on Amazon. So that will give you more information of what we're talking about today. But anyway, so what my presentation will be today, I'm going to exclude all these compositional principles that you normally come acquainted with over books or compositions workshops. These are new, and I've filtered them out to be the ones that I know for sure that you've not heard. If you're new, if you have been my student for some time, then it's just going to be a brush up and a review for you, because you've heard this during all my classes. Okay, so let's start with the following. Subdue foregrounds and peripheral margins by avoiding distracting details and value contrasts. Here, let me just get my camera a little bit out of the way there. There we go. Okay, and by avoiding distracting details and value contrast, the middle ground is holding your attention in this painting. So this is very important, because the way you want things to work so you don't clutter your painting is normally people are standing and they're looking forward. And when they're looking forward, their head is straight and level. Therefore, everything that you can see that comes into your vision will be in front of you. How many of you have banged your feet on furniture? I'm sure a lot of you have, right? Which means that we're not looking at the ground. So there's this misconcept where people have saying that, well, since things are closer to you, they should be more detailed. That is false. So the best way out is leave your immediate foreground alone. Right about here, leave that alone. Don't touch it. Just put enough visual information to make it interesting, but nothing should be distracting. As you can see, it's applicable here. So this waterfall here should not be in the foreground. It should be further back. Okay, and the reason for that, if we read this very quickly, it's because we want to paint the way the human eye naturally sees reality. So just, I'll read this quickly. This is the way rods and cones in the human eye would look under a microscope. There's much more concentration in the center of the eye, referred to as the fovea. The rods and cones become more separated away from the center, blurring our peripheral vision. Every dot receives visual input. The closer the dots are together, the sharper the image becomes. The more space between the dots, the blurrier the vision becomes. So if you look at the bottom of this over here, the cells are more sparse. So what's in the immediate foreground, you cannot bring that into focus. So you want the painting to agree with the way the eye normally or naturally sees reality. You concentrate the visual information in the middle ground and somewhat cluttered in the center of the painting, and you leave the margins alone. I call those peripheral margins. The mistake that most artists make is that they rely on cameras. So when you on photographs, so the photographs work differently. Cameras work differently than the human eye. It says here a digital camera has millions of pixels. In this picture, it simulates the way they appear evenly spaced. So all the cells are perfectly spaced equally like a chessboard. The human eye doesn't work like that. Each pixel captures a color, which would be the equivalent of one of the cells of the eye. Everything's in sharp focus. That's why everything in a photo is in sharp focus. All right, so that's one of the mistakes. The big problem that most artists have is transitioning from a photograph to the painting. So this will give you some ideas. Okay, so here I call this the peripheral margins. So my advice is leave this part of the painting quite subdued. We can also put some here. If you put the visual information in the middle ground here, leave the immediate foreground alone, start to subdue the other portion of the foreground, but put all your visual information in the middle ground, and leave these to the point where you don't have anything distracting, which would normally be a strong value contrast or sharp edges. Leave those areas alone. You're going to guarantee a much better composition. Okay. Now design your paintings to include, here's step number 2. This is a part number 2. That part I already dealt with. So I'm going to go quickly point after point. I think there's about 25 really good compositional points here. Design your paintings to include 2 obviously different halves. This is a poor reference because both halves resemble each other. So nothing is faster than a ticket to boredom than having a painting whose both sides resemble each other. It's not entertaining enough. So one way to do that test when you're going to select your reference photo is divide this painting down the middle, and side A or half the half part of the part A and B, they should be completely different. Well, at least very obviously different. So I did a painting from this and used this compositional knowledge that you're learning today. And of course I changed the colors and all that, but you can see there's a difference here where instead of having these smaller evergreen trees over here, I put one very big large one, cropped it right out of the painting, and then this visual information here is different. On this side there was a bush, on this side there isn't. Go back to the reference, you can see that there's also a resemblance between this area and this area. Now when we're talking about resemblance, we're talking about visually implied. Obviously it's not going to be exact, but they're going to be somewhat similar. So that's a real good formula to determine if the painting's going to work or not from a reference photo. Okay, another thing, a culprit of photographs is that it tends to take pictures that are too dark. So this is the exact same time of the day where I changed the shutter of the photograph and took the picture. You can see the second one is letting you look right into the shadows, whereas the first one, the shadows are too dark, and that's just because it has to do something with the aperture of the camera. So again, the whole problem, the reason why we're learning all this composition is that we need to go from the reference photo or plein air to the actual painting, and that's where all the problems happen. It all starts from that photograph, if taken at face value. So ignore values from photos that are darker than a mid-dark for daylight landscapes, including overcast days. The end result is that all shapes should have an identifiable color. So when you look into the shadows and you look into the darkness of, let's say, an evergreen tree, you should be able to call out the hue on the color wheel. The only exception to that would be an accent. In other words, where you punch a little hole into a rock or an indentation in an evergreen tree. that would be the exception, because you need that accent to establish the depth of the 3D effect. But other than that, when you're talking about the full shape, nothing should be darker than a mid-dark, which would be about a value 7 on a grayscale from 1 to 10, 10 being black. So I suggest you take 3 photographs of the scene. That way you'll get the rock color, because a second photograph, you can see that the rocks are pretty much bleached out, right? Whereas in the first photograph, the colors and the rock seems to be more accurate. But then we're paying the price with the dark rocks. So if you take 3 photographs, you can borrow the visual information from the lighter side of the rock and yet take the visual information from the first photograph where the rocks seem to be more natural instead of bleached out. Okay, here's another example. This is an excellent photograph, very tempting to paint, but it's got those black areas. On the bottom right-hand side, the flower pot, the leaves, when you look inside the shadows, you got blackness. There's touches of black on the over here, right? Because the camera, again, is looking at the light over here and obscures everything else. This is the painting that I did from that. And you can see I lifted up all the light in the entire painting. So we have sort of like a Monet Impressionist painting here, where there is really no strong darks. Everything is brilliant with light. And so wherever you point in this painting, wherever you put your finger on, either here or here or here or anywhere, you can always call out the hue and say, okay, this is a blue gray, this is a green. So there's light everywhere. And the way to assess that is that you just look at your photograph on a grayscale. Okay, so I would say this: in all scenarios, unless you're doing a nocturne painting, no shape in your painting, except for accents, should be darker than the value 7, 10 being black. That's where you can still distinguish the color. Here are some examples. This is an overcast day. And if you look at the whole entire painting, except that within that hut or in that shack, you can see that there's a dark value. But that would be obvious, because now well, it should even be lighter than that, to be honest. But I did that to bring out the light better. Here's an example of a twilight scene or a moonlight scene. You still don't see those blacks everywhere. There's light everywhere. And that's what makes the painting. That's an easy formula, right? Just don't go past the value 7 in any shape, 10 being black. So I've given you 3 very easy, readily available techniques to improve your paintings. One is leave the immediate foregrounds alone. Well, I can't say alone, but leave them subdued. And then the peripheral margins. 2, divide a painting down the middle, compare both sides, make sure the 2 sides are different. 3, don't paint anything that appears to be black in a photograph. See, quick and easy and right to the point. Okay, what you can do also is, why would you have to respect the photograph every time? You can change the time of the day for more visual impact, which I did in this painting. Obviously, the painting like this has much more of an impact than this one. So you don't have to respect that time of the day. So you use the photograph as a backbone. I always equate this as the models that they have in the dolls that they have in Macy's in New York. I don't know if they still have them in the front windows, but you know, in the 50s, they would have these mannequins, and then they would change the clothes from the summer to from the spring to the summer to the fall to the winter. So you got the same structure, the structure of the mannequin, but then you're changing the clothes on the mannequin. Think that same way with photographs. Yes, we have that structure of the building, the angles and everything. So I took that at face value, but I changed the time of the day. Now, obviously, the painting is a much better rendering than just trying to copy that photograph, right? Now, this is called the gradient plane. The gradient plane is a secret that Disney illustrators use, or Pixar illustrators use. If you ever get a chance to watch Pixar or Disney movies, you'll notice that they always go, they make a transition from dark to light, light to dark, warm to cool, or cool to warm. When you do that, things seem to recede. So it's very typical that, let's say in Toy Story, I think from Pixar, at the very top of the corner of the house, the interior of a house, it's darker up in the corner, and then gradually it gets lighter as the light approaches the figures on the floor. So I'm exploiting that idea of the gradient plane where, okay, we have cool, slowly transitioning to warm, and you can justify that because it's closer to the sunset. But there's more to, you don't want to really justify it scientifically. You want it to have visual impact because obviously clouds don't have that much of a red in them. But then you got a gradient plane over here, so I went light over here and gradually got darker as it goes into the distance. See, that gives, even though I have a very small portion of water here, that really conveys the idea of depth. Like you can see like, oh my gosh, that's a mile away. Than if I just have a flat value. And so I'm doing the same thing here. I cast a shadow over the immediate foreground. And just the sheer fact by doing that, it makes you feel that there's much more distance from here to where the people are. So that's called gradient planes. Okay, another thing that we want to learn is about pixelation. And that's my own terminology. This is a tree that I did 30 years ago. Maybe a little bit more. Obviously, I took a photograph like we all did. I tried to copy the photographs thinking, okay, if the photograph is right, the painting is right. Wrong. So I fell in all the traps. There's a circle there. All the little dark and white spots are competing, and it becomes what I call pixelated. Very important because here's one of the secrets. The more brush work that you put in a painting, the more information or clutter that you put in a painting, the less the viewer is going to be daydreaming, imagining, or participating in your scene. Because now the brain of the viewer has to process all that visual information and make sense out of it, which goes through a transition unconsciously, but yet there's a feeling of busyness. So we have to create new symbols. Don't think about, oh, just because an evergreen tree or tree looks right in a photograph, you can transition that to a painting. It won't work. Believe me, it won't work. It becomes pixelated because you never have a tree, unless it's a bonsai tree, that's 6 or 8 inches tall that you'd have in a painting. They're normally like 2 or 3 stories tall. So the very fact that you bring it down to a small size makes it become pixelated. So, for example, this reference photo here, if you analyze this part here, and I've seen many watercolors on Pinterest, many watercolors on YouTube, you name it. What they do is they'll take a small little brush and they'll start to put all these little dark areas in there, right? Working it to death and thinking, okay, I got to get closer to the photograph because that's the way the tree is. Remember, this is not a tree. It's nothing. No tree is 6 inches tall. And then what happens is that the mind gets tired of looking at the painting. So if you look at my watercolor rendering of that, there's no pixelation. This whole area is just almost one great big mass with just a little bit of negative painting here and there to establish the 3D form. So it's a much more relaxed point of view. Also here you can see there's a lot of pixelation. Here not so much. But look at the more relaxed view. So this for you, when you're looking at this, now you can start to participate in the painting because it's relaxed. So you're going to add your own visual information in your mind's eye. Remember, we don't really see things with the eye. That's not true. Eyes do not see. The image is formed in the visual cortex of your brain. So it's actually the mind that's looking at something inside the head near the back of the neck, not the eyes. The eyes are just conduits, just like pipes in your house that carry the water back and forth. That's all they're good for. The eyes don't see anything. It's your brain that's seeing it. So when you're seeing something, the viewer wants to participate inside the mind, and that's why you give a relaxed painting like this. Okay, another compositional thing that you haven't heard of before. Blur things that are moving. Only allow enough of sharp edges to enable eye focus. See, I could take the photograph and take a picture of this, and it's going to freeze those geese in time, and they seem like they're suspended from a yarn. But if I start to soften their wingspan, just a bit, it doesn't have to be a lot, they're out of focus, except this one here is in focus, because you want the eye to be able to hook onto something, but these are not in focus. So it gives this idea that everything is moving. There's an example of people in motion too. See all these, that the fact that they're blurred, you can't see their feet that well, tells you that they're in motion. Water in motion too. Blur your waterfalls. Okay, something that you never see in photographs is purples. Or you don't even see it. I mean, very rarely. You might catch a glimpse of it here and there, but normally on rocks you don't see it. But it's a very beautiful ingredient to add to your paintings. Now, this painting, of course, has an exaggeration of it because it's a watercolor, and I was playing with it. It even looks cartoonish. Maybe you don't want to go to that extreme, but always try to find ways to introduce purples into your painting. So here's an example where the purple's not really overdone. Oh, I'm not going to say overdone because that was the objective of this watercolor. But here, you can, if you look, just glance, don't look directly at the rocks in the waterfall. Look a little bit away from it, and you'll see that the purples become more evident. Which, by the way, is a very good technique for determining color. Let's say you want to copy a color from plein air. Even though that, to be honest, there's not much you can copy from nature that's going to work in a painting and in color anyway, because everything is too monochromatic or gray, ash gray. But if you look a little bit away from the painting, you'll see that the purples become a little bit emphasized. And that avoids that dull gray look. So try to incorporate purples in your greens and your rocks. This is a real good example of that. Okay, another rule of thumb for me is all backgrounds, I would avoid hard edges. That's it. All soft edges. You can see very clearly in this watercolor, because the moment that you create a hard edge in the background, it's going to come too close to you, and it's going to compete with the hard edges in this area, especially when you put buildings. So you can see a very clear hard edge here. So beautiful contrast. And I call this the principle of contrast. Now, if you take my classes on a regular base, you're going to hear much more of this. You're going to see much more of this. I'm sort of rushing this presentation to get it in. But obviously, this will come up many times during my classes. So it's a really good idea that that you join my paint along classes so that you can see how this develops bit by bit, brushstroke by brushstroke, and you can hear me speak out loud, think out loud. You can hear me think out loud. But a very important aspect is called principle of contrast, and I can guarantee that you've not read that anywhere or heard it anywhere. And it's such an important concept because it means juxtaposing one thing in front of another. For example, a hard edge contrasted by a soft edge. So in this case, we have this. That's one aspect of principle of contrast. Another principle of contrast would be a little bit busy versus no busy. For example, here, the flowers get busier as they go towards the center. And then over here, for example, and then they taper off and it becomes more conceptual as I approach the peripheral margin that we spoke about. So to know what a peripheral margin is, so you remember, if some of you are my age, I'm 65. In the old days, we used to write on notebooks that have blue lines and a red margin line, and you'd get a little bang on your knuckles from the teacher if you invaded that margin area. You have to respect that. Well, just remember those years that you want to create the same idea here in your paintings where the peripheral margin is what I'm outlining now. Those should be subdued. So there you go. The principle of contrast means, see, just imagine if this tree branch were to be hard-edged. It would seem like it's growing right out of the roof of the building. But the fact that it's soft-edged, done wet on wet, that brings this part of the building closer to you and sends everything back into the background. And that's with all mediums. Oh, by the way, everything that I'm saying here is not only for watercolor or oils, it's all mediums. These are universal compositional principles. Okay, another important concept is make a conscious effort to render 3D forms as much as you can. So many times in photographs, you won't see three-dimensional forms. Now, nature has its own way of conveying a sense of depth because your brain can make a judgment and say, okay, from here to here, we have 100 yards, so to say, or 200 yards, right? But you're working on a two-dimensional surface, so all bets are off. You just can't just copy a photograph because many times photographs won't have that 3D look to them. So we have artists have to render almost everything into 3D forms. Now, I'll show you where, for example. In a photograph, I can guarantee you that this little shaded part of this mountain will not appear. It will not be there. You'll just see a flat mountain. But the fact that I do that, it creates this sense that there's more depth. Same thing over here. See, I got dark over here. I rendered a 3D form. Now look at the side of the trees. In order for the trees to look like they're round, I put a dark area over here as well. Look how it seems like it's round. So I'm purposely rendering 3D forms that do not appear in photographs. Also with the clouds, you can see that there's a front part, and then you can see the bottom of the cloud. Again, you probably won't see that in a photograph. But then it looks like you're looking right under the cloud, like it's on top of you because of that 3D effect. Here's another example. You can clearly see how I'm doing it here. Oh, here's a real good example. So you can feel the roundness of that bush. Okay, the number one, the reason, oh, wait, I got one more to go here. This one. Apply roller coaster eye movement and melodic lines as much as possible. This is a huge concept. This is the number one most, and what I'm going to tell you right now is the number one most important compositional concept. And yet, I have never read about it. I've never heard it. You're going to hear it right now. You take 3 lines. Straight line that we can see everywhere in photographs, plein air, wherever. Then you got a wavy line, zigzag line, and semicircle line. These appear so many times in nature, it's incredible. And when you copy these from photographs, you're going to be in trouble. Because the reason for that is, in this line here and this line here, the eye moves too quickly. And one thing that's very discomforting for artists, for viewers, is to create a line and the viewer feels like that he or she is rushing along that line. So you want to, the whole trick is to slow down the eye is by changing the straight lines and the semicircles into different lines. The wavy line is slowing it down a bit, but it's too monotonous. Wait, here, let me correct this here. This is a zigzag line. Oh, here it is. Yeah, that's the zigzag line. Okay, and the zigzag line is too monotonous. So you'll find this on evergreen trees, forests of evergreen trees. So these 4 lines should be avoided, and they should be substituted for the ones at the bottom, lines to use. All you need to do to design your paintings is 3 lines. A graceful line, which represents a roller coaster, easy to remember. A melodic line, and I'll give you an example of that in a minute. And then interrupt lines substitutes a straight line. Okay, so let's go back to this sample here. This whole painting, the reason why, at least for me, it's working, it's one of my favorite seascapes actually, is because I'm fulfilling those lines. Let's study that. Let's break it all down. Let's pretend that we're doctors and we're looking at an MRI. First of all, we have what was called this roller coaster graceful line here. So when people say, when they're looking at your painting, they're going to say, that's a beautiful seascape. Truthfully, it's not a seascape. It's a piece of paper. This is a watercolor. To go for a seascape, you have to get on a plane and fly to Florida, unless you live there already. Okay, so they're not enjoying the seascape. what's happening is that the mind is giving the excuse and says, oh, it's a beautiful seascape. No, it isn't. What it is a compilation of very relaxed, pleasing lines. That's all what it is. Your success in your painting, I'm saying this is the number one aspect. And again, if you join my classes, starting this Saturday, day after tomorrow, I'm going to do 2 paintings. You're going to be seeing the implementation of this. I can't say it too many times how important it is. If you can reconvert all your lines into those 3 that I just showed you, the viewers will definitely love your painting. So let's look at it. This here becomes a melodic line. This becomes a graceful line. See the roller coaster effect? I took a dip in there. This is very important that I do this. The graceful line, again, a roller coaster means it has peaks and valleys, right? So here we have a big dip. So the eye is moving slowly as you're processing the visual information. Then we definitely have a graceful line on top of this whole water part. Look at this. Look at this roller coaster effect. So it's not the wave that's beautiful, it's the line that's beautiful. You know that, and that's going to make a difference. Melodic line over here. Staircase effect. Everywhere. And then this becomes a graceful line too. So the graceful line has rounded areas and the melodic line has more like angles. Look how beautiful that is. So the whole painting is a compilation of all these lines, and that's why it works. Yeah, I'm not. Jude is saying something about the line pulling into the painting. I know there's things that are called visual paths. I'm not even on that because you can read that everywhere else. Again, my presentation today is going to make it apart from all the other presentations you might see on YouTube or in books, because I'm not going to repeat information that you already know, which means create a visual path. The idea is to enrich this presentation to give you information you have not read before or seen before. Here's a very good example of the roller coaster graceful line. So when I'm creating these paintings, I'm not even thinking in terms of trees or rocks. I'm thinking I have 3 lines, mostly 2 lines. Let's even boil it down to 2 lines. Graceful lines and melodic lines. If I can keep those 2 things in my mind, the rest of the painting will be just excuses to implement those lines, such as treetops or rocks on a shoreline. But my primary consideration is line. So in this case, my trees is an excuse for the line. So I don't think first trees, I think first line, and then I think trees. Trees goes, line is king, the tree is the prince. The trees are the prince of the painting. So look at this dip here. This is a classical, and this is going to help you plan your painting so easily, because now you don't have to worry about copying the photograph or guessing. Just think about that roller coaster effect, and away you go. You can make a beautiful painting out of almost anything. Also here too. Now, just as a side note, of course, these water lilies, well, it's not a side note, it's part of my presentation. Whatever you do on one side of the painting, don't do it on the other. If they compete, just echo. So I cluttered these water lilies on the right-hand side, and I only echoed some of them on the left-hand side, so it doesn't look like it's neglected. That's why this painting's working. It's just a simple composition, but I took that into account. Side A and side B are different. Obviously different, visually speaking. Okay, contrary to popular, because many times in books, and you always read about, or people, the teacher says, well, this is the focal point. That's more like a cliche. You really don't need a focal point in a landscape painting, because how many times do we admire landscapes that don't have focal points? It seems like it puts you into a box. So you can have a really nice looking painting without a focal point, as long as you move the viewer all the way to the background. So the reward of the viewer is to be traveling through your painting. This is a watercolor. Now, look at the evergreen tree. I know that evergreen trees usually have zigzag lines, right? Mostly like that. Well, I changed that. Again, line for me is priority. So I created a graceful line here, like a pendulum, reducing the zigzags as much as possible without losing the form. Look at it on this side too. You can very clearly see that. And then I'm moving you again slowly, gracefully, all the way to the background. So I don't need, this does not have a focal point, and yet the painting is successful. Now, this is very important too. You've all heard about this. You have read or heard asymmetrical or abstract shapes. Yes, that's true. But what you probably never heard is, okay, what is an abstract shape? I hear it all the time, but what is it? Well, an abstract shape means it's designed in such a way, and an easy formula again is take an imaginary line down the middle, compare side A, compare side B. If both sides are obviously different, you have an appealing designed abstract shape. So finally, there's been a definition to this after all these years. And what makes it different is that here this is about the same, but this big dip in there, that makes the difference that you don't have the other side. So if we encapsulate this, pretend that this is a silhouette. Don't think of it as an evergreen tree. I don't even think of it in those terms. I just think of it as a silhouette that represents a evergreen tree. That's my silhouette. If the silhouette is attractive, it doesn't matter what you do inside the silhouette. It's the silhouette per se that makes the shape attractive, not what you do inside of it. Rendering all the leaves and all the little branches and boughs and all that will not make a shape look good if the general silhouette is not working. And again, I'm holding true.
Questions now, Joe?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought there were not. I'll just finish this. Also, I said all backgrounds should be wet on wet. You can clearly see this in this painting over here. Everything is done wet on wet. Go ahead, Jude. Thanks.
Painterly is asking, why didn't you reflect the sun into the water in this painting?
I don't really have any sunlight there. I just have a hint of it over here. Okay, I'm going to put the volume up a bit. I only have it. I don't really have a strong sunlight. I just have like a glow here. The idea I want to convey is an overcast day, I guess, so there's no reason to reflect it. I did reflect to a point this evergreen tree in the water here because I'm representing icy water, and icy water will, it's not actually icy water, it's iced water that's frozen over is what I'm representing here, which means that its reflections will be very weak compared to soaked wet water. Okay, greens is always a problem for artists because they can become too garish, too acidic. So my recommendation is limit your yellow-green hues and work all the way from like the yellow-green should be limited. The green is okay to be, concentrate that all over the place, but you got to get the blue-green in there too. So work all the way from the color wheel from the yellow-green to the blue-green. Okay, somebody's saying about this painting here.
Yeah, they're asking about the water lily painting, why you did not do the reflections there.
Gotta find it here. Well, because you don't want them to compete. You don't want them to stack. That's another concept. Stacking means you take a color, like reflections, that's the risk that you can make them stack. That if I got this glow over here and I repeat it in the water, that can be an issue. It also depends where you're standing, right? You don't necessarily have to see that reflection. Besides, this is a painting. And you don't have to necessarily follow logic of nature. If it's going to compete, if a reflection is going to compete with the sky, then you don't have to follow it. So I'm sort of like putting a band here of this yellow because it's windy. Another answer to that is if it's windy and the water's agitated, you won't see a reflection. Okay, so this green painting is compiling all that information. You can see there's blue greens in the distance. over here. And then you got the greens over here. These are like a primary, well, I can't say primary, but secondary green on the color wheel. Oh, the foreground is relaxed. Once again, the principles apply. And my periphery is relaxed, subdued. And so now you're concentrating all your visual information here in the middle ground, and then you're creating mystery in the background. That's all you need to do. I don't have any of this distraction over here. So if you squint your eyes at the painting, you can see that the visual information is enriched in this area here, where it should be. Very easy solution. Okay, something I'm sure you've never heard. You want to add some jewels to your painting, add touches of discordant colors. So we hear a lot about color harmony during the cocktail party. Throw in a color that you don't have to respect elsewhere. A touch of this strong red, cadmium red, where it's not repeated elsewhere, is a discordant color, and it just creates a nice, beautiful little focal point within the center of interest. This painting here, for example, put your thumb over that red bush. Just, I'm doing it right now. And cover it on your screen. And you'll see that somehow the painting's lacking something, right? So that little red bush just adds that nice little touch, that jewel to the painting. All right. Now, this is something that's called pointer. So the whole idea is to move the viewer's eye, right? So again, we've read many times about visual paths. If you break down most of the professional artists' work, you're going to see tons of paintings with streams, roads, whatever, bringing the viewer in. You'll see that all the time. So I'm not even going to mention that in detail. But what you probably never heard of is called visual pointers, which are assistants to your visual path. So this painting does not have an obvious visual path. It doesn't have like a stream that's going from the bottom up, but it's got something else. You can feel that there's a thrust, an eye thrust, by the way I organize these grass strands. See, this is a rhythm. You can refer to this as rhythm. There's a rhythm of the brush where these go, you can see that these grass strands are leaning towards this focal point. And then on this side, the other way, instead of them leaning or aiming or directing the eye towards the edge of the painting, I reverse that. And logic doesn't apply here. And now I'm using these as pointers, like little darts, like throwing darts at a dartboard, right? I know logically if it's windy, these strands are going to go that way, but we don't care about logic in paintings. So science and nature is irrelevant to us. What's important to us is how it works in the painting. And again, look at the background, all wet on wet. Here's another example of a pointer. Probably if I didn't mention it, you wouldn't probably see it, but it's subtle, right? Remember, we do this all subtly. We artists are supposed to do this in a way where it's not obvious. You're not giving it away. That's why it's so difficult to reverse engineer so many paintings, because you always say, well, how can that person paint so well? What's so good about those paintings? I can't figure it out. It doesn't look like the photograph. Well, they have all these secrets. Now, I'm not going to say that I invented these things, right? But a lot of what I'm saying is reverse engineered from, let's say, 30 of the top artists in the world, landscape artists. I am adding my own brew to this, like the two different corners, for example, but I'm putting a terminology on what people do subconsciously. So you'll see artists, they will do these visual pointers, but they just do it out of sheer instinct and talent. And it just looks good to them. But once you say, well, why did you do that? They probably don't know why. Or at least they don't say why they're doing it. But what makes me have so many students during my classes is because I have found a way to verbalize all these embedded all these embedded subliminal secrets in paintings and extract them, dissect them under a microscope, and give you a reason why those paintings work. And then this is one of them. So here, your eye follows this contour of the tree, and instead of going right out of the tree, at least right away, it does this. And then this branch here is purposely put there to bring us into this focal area, right? So I'm using a pointer for that. And I'm also doing the same. Even this branch over here starts to hang this way. So I'm saying, hey, don't leave my painting yet. Follow the yellow brick road, Dorothy, and go to the farm over here. And this one's pointing to the sun over here. And then you can see the visual pointers over here. I mean, it's all, then you can see there's a melodic line on the top here. It's all based on what I'm talking about. This is, this instead of, remember we talked earlier about a semicircle? I said one of the lines that should be avoided is a circle. Well, if I just, or a straight line, if I put that mountain the way it was in the painting, which was just like a straight line like that, your eye's going to be moving too quickly. So what I do is I slow down the eye. I know I need to slow down the eye. So we go like this, take a dip, come up again, do a little bit of a zigzag, just enough so it doesn't get too monotonous. Take another dip, then soften edges, and so you can see there's a tendency of all the eye movement going into the same direction. Now we hear a lot about visual paths coming in from the bottom of the painting. But not necessarily from the bottom. You can create a visual path that's coming from the top, because that's how we read newspapers. We start from the very top left corner and work our way down, right? So it only makes sense that not only should you worry about ushering the viewer in from the bottom towards a focal area over here, but you can also do it from the top to the bottom. So you can see that this shadow here, this cloud shadow here, has been strategically designed to give you a feeling that it's moving you into the painting. That's why it feels right. So this is going to help you a lot, because when you're looking at a photograph that's cloudy, instead of saying, well, scratching your head and say, well, what do I do? Just copy those clouds and second guess? You can say, no, I don't have to copy those clouds, but I can set it up where I can direct my eye, the viewer's eye, to the center of interest. And that will tell me exactly how to position those clouds so I don't have to depend on the photograph. I did that here as well. See? This is, again, strategically set up where you read from left to right. So your eye is moving from the top, slowly, gracefully, roller coaster effect, latches onto this cloud, and it brings you close enough to the focal point. And all this is subconscious. The viewers just feel it. They don't know why. They just enjoy the painting without breaking it down. But we're breaking it down because we're artists. Incidentally, we have the melodic line also at the bottom of the cloud. So again, you're not subject to, if you know that everything is based on those, in the major part, those two lines, graceful and melodic, your whole painting can be designed. Watch the eye movement here. So what I do is, when a photograph, I see a cloudy sky, and I say, okay, graceful lines and melodic lines. That's all I need to know. We have a straight line here, sort of. It's a curved line, almost a straight line. Interrupt it. And now I'm using an interrupted line. I interrupt it with the font. Graceful line on the shadow. So it's just not a matter of just copying a shadow from a photograph. It's about creating a graceful line. See that? Or this is, or you can call this a melodic line, probably better. Sometimes those terms can be very close together. So instead of thinking, oh, how do I do a shadow? I just say, how do I create a graceful melodic line? Oh, I know. I'll use a shadow for that. I'll use a cloud for that. I'll use a tree contour for that. Those are my participants, but not my main reasons. So you don't only have to bring in the viewer's eye through the top with a cloud, you can use a tree like this too and let it slope down. By the way, if you see these leaves here, they're also strategically placed to be pointers. So I group the leaves here. You can see the little dots there. This one here over is pointing towards this area. And also here, we have another graceful line. Oh, it froze on me. Okay. Okay. That's fine. Let me get back to my drawing. Okay. All right. So we have another graceful line that's coming down this way. Another graceful line that's coming down this way. And there we go. Okay, of that graceful line now, we're going to upgrade that. We're going to upgrade it to the most delicious line that you can create is a graceful line with lost and found edges. Now you're at the VIP. Graceful line, roller coaster line with lost and found edges. That means that the eye is playing between focusing and not focusing. You can clearly see that over here. We go like this. But look at the edges. We have hard edge over here and a bleeding edge over here. Only to pick up another hard edge over here. Now that becomes another principle of contrast. Meaning hard edges followed by a soft edge, hard edge, soft edge. That principle of contrast is what makes the painting work. So you can see over here too, that's bleeding over here. And we pick up, we got some hard edges over there. And we have a gradient plane here too. We got darker in the foreground and lighter as we go into the distance. So this whole painting is constructed the same way. Melodic line at the bottom of the clouds, etc. All right. So here's another example of lost and found edges. This tree all the way in the distance, because it's further back, is all wet on wet. Then we have another range of trees in this plane, hard-edged, soft, soft, hard-edged, soft, soft, hard-edged, hard-edged. See how nice that is? In the corner, this is the periphery. Remember we talked about that peripheral margin of the painting. We have the principal contrast where we have focus versus non-focus. Now in a photograph, you're going to see all kinds of little leaves here and little indentations and little dark spots. But that's too busy. That becomes pixelated. So in our paintings, we don't want that pixelation. We want our lines to be, our areas to be a little bit busy here that the eye can take that information and then subdue over here. So you can, and this makes life very easy for all of you, by the way, because you don't have to worry about detailing everything. That's a lot of work. The more work you put in the painting, the more work the viewer is going to put in his mind or her mind. So this is just a blur, incoherent blur, but yet it works. There's no pixelation in this tree over here. See, they're great big foliage clumps. By the way, I'm not the only one that paints trees like that. Many top landscape artists paint trees with great big foliage clusters. They don't indicate leaves except maybe in one area. So here we have another interesting principle of contrast. We have leaves, busyness, in the middle part where we can intake that visual information versus relaxed. Principle of contrasts. So this looks good because we don't have it here. This looks good because we don't have it there. Principal contrasts. That's exactly what it is. This looks good here because it's busy. We don't have it busy here. The mistake that many artists will make will say, okay, well, I sort of like all those leaves. They're looking really nice. Why don't I just keep repeating it, thinking that the more beans that you put, the more jelly beans that you put in the bowl, or the more potato chips you put in the bowl, the better it's going to be. Not when it comes to painting. You need that principal contrasts. Another example of a gradient plane, we have green transitioning slowly to yellow, raw sienna. Green transitioning to a yellow-orange. Gradient plane. This painting here is packed with goodies. I'm breaking it all down. We're looking at an MRI in a hospital. Check this out. Look at this wall here, including the eaves. You got darker to lighter, cooler to warmer, darker to lighter, cooler to warmer. This is a classical example of a gradient plane. Gradient plane. The secret of all the Disney, Pixar, Nickelodeon illustrators. And it shows depth. Okay. Limit whites and waterfalls, snow scenes and clouds. I should say limit whites and water foam in general. I just thought about that. Also seascapes. Because white is void of a color, if you use too much of it, you're creating too many gaps of silence in your visual melody. Your song has no voice, no instruments. So color and values are your instruments and your voice. But put a little bit of a gap of silence. So a little bit of white, but without cluttering it, is what makes it work. So you can see I concentrated my white only in this small area, and all this becomes a blur. Look at the typical example here, how I left that foreground pretty much alone. There's an evergreen tree here, but it's not very distracting. I had to do that to change the two sides too. Maybe I could have left it out if I was going to be really strict with my subduing the foreground. At least I didn't put a great big value contrast there. Okay, it wasn't on my end here. I don't understand. I kept getting the green light that was sending out the information. But anyway, this almost never happens. Okay, we'll keep on going here. Are we all good? Okay, it wasn't. Yeah, okay, I can hear my own voice. Alrighty. Okay, we'll pick up from where we left off. No problem. Okay, I think I finished that slide anyway, just coincidentally. Okay, here's an example where snow scenes, especially when it comes to snow scenes, you really want to be careful with the amount of white that you use, because you can the whole area can be like a whole carpet of white paint, and there's no color to it. So if you look at the bottom here, I'm able to put in some purples. Pretty much this is like a blue kind of gray, but you can echo like yellows. You can see a little touch of yellow here in the snow area. All this is in shade, right? And the only area where the sun's actually hitting it is right here, which, by the way, I'm going to refer to that. This is another important new concept that I'm sure you haven't read about, a rest area. There you go, a rest area. I'll go back to the waterfall. You have a question about the waterfall? I think I finished it. Did you see all this on this slide over here? Okay, I just quickly mentioned that you can see there's a gradient plane here from there. I'm limiting my whites and my clouds. I'm limiting my whites and my foam. We also have a principle of contrasts, which means we go, watch this, we get busy water over here. And as we approach the edge or the peripheral margin, because it could be also gradual, okay, remember the peripheral margin. Gradually, I'm tapering off those the little wavelets until you get almost nothing. So you can see a very classical example of very little visual input on that side. You can see that these crevices are lined up to direct the eye into the painting. We connect over here and come this way. And then you can see clearly see a melodic line at the bottom of this cliff here. Okay? And then we have principle of contrast where we have busy to subdued. And these rocks are all lining up to create that visual rhythm. So you don't have any of these crevices are not contradicting the eye flow. So in other words, I don't put a crevice or a crack in the rock to go this way, and then suddenly one goes that way. They all follow more or less the same direction. So it's called rhythm. Okay. I think we just talked about this right now. We can shift on to this one. Oh, you can see here, gradient plane. Darker to lighter, cooler to warmer. Create gradient planes whenever possible, wherever you can. Always find an excuse. Look very carefully. It's very subtle in this painting, but it's there. Darker to lighter, cooler to warmer. Stairs and the stair steps. Darker to lighter. And of course you can just use an excuse and say this is reflected light. Cooler to warmer. Darker to cooler. Darker to warmer. Cooler to warmer. The whole thing is built on gradient planes. Melodic line, even at this, like a photograph, this original photograph did not have these breaks in this line. But I'm thinking, okay, remember I gave you 3 lines. Roller coaster effect, graceful, melodic, staircasey, and then a straight line becomes interrupted. So this normally would become a straight line, but I convert it into a little mini melodic line that interrupts that straight line. So we go like this, like this, like this. We come down. Very subtle. It's not very obvious, but it's there. Especially over here, you can see it. Very classical over here. Look, like this. And I'm just using the indentation of these stones to make that line like that. Even here. Isn't this cool when you just break it all down like that? Here's another example of this building. Cooler to warmer, darker to lighter. Okay, this is the original photograph of a painting I'm going to show in a minute. And you can see that it contains no gradient planes, typical boring area, and the rocks are mostly monochromatic. So Joe, I apply my compositional knowledge to that I'm conveying to you, and I say I need gradient planes. I have the melodic line already because the rocks have that, so I don't have to worry about that. We have that automatically, so I can copy that. There's no sense reconstructing a photograph if I already have the visual information that I need. So I already have all these melodic lines. But what I don't have is gradient planes to make it more interesting, and I don't have, what is it? Yeah, gradient planes. Oh, and the new concept called color variegation or variety of color. So look at the photograph and look at the painting. What a difference, huh? So what am I doing? I'm exaggerating. This is called color variegation or just variety of color. Okay, let's break it. Let's break down this MRI once again. Gradient plane. Darker to lighter. Very inviting, right? The rocks are in the immediate foreground, which I cautioned you against. But if you really squint your eyes, you don't see them because their value of those rocks, it's not so much the detail that you put in the immediate foreground, it's how much it stands out, what you have to avoid. So these rocks are just, they're there, but they're hidden. The value of those rocks are hidden within that foreground so they don't distract you. It just makes it interesting. You can see a melodic line here. You can see the melodic line here. And more importantly, look at all this color variety. Remember I mentioned earlier about throwing in some purples. Look how rich that looks in there. Look at this. Another thing. Busy crevices, principle of contrasts, slowly becoming more subdued. Yeah, I think their Artist Network is posting the link. You know what, we can take, I'm seeing people asking about the course. Let me just bring let me bring it up here for you. If you go to artistnetwork.com, on the front page it says, what does it say? Well, you'll find it easily. This is the next course this is a course that's going to take place this Saturday from 1 to 5 p.m., 1 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to knock off 2 paintings in one session. This oil painting where you're going to, these principles that you're learning right now, I will apply these. Yeah, let's look at the reference here. It's a little bit blurry because it's a thumbnail, but we're going to apply these principles of how to make the foliage into graceful lines, how to create the melodic lines at the side, the bank, the river bank. So all these principles are going to be applied in these 2 paintings, and this is a second painting, that's a watercolor. So we're going to do an oil painting and a watercolor in the same session. So go to artistnetwork.com and you'll find the option where it talks about workshops. Click on that and you'll find me and you'll find the courses. I guess some of you can see that there's some really good learning going on here, right? Things that you haven't heard before if you've been into this for a while. Now, what makes this painting very interesting is the gradient plane once again. The gradient plane really works to invite you in. So we have lots of brilliant sunlight over here and gradually getting darker and less interesting. Or you can say that's a principle of contrasts. Any of the two, they work together. Another thing here, look at this line over here on this evergreen tree. I don't have to respect those zigzag boughs. I can reduce the boughs, create a musical line, visually speaking. And that's, so I don't paint an evergreen tree. I paint a graceful line. And I use the evergreen tree as an excuse to create the line. Now, a lot of professionals do this, but they don't say it. They don't break it down. That's what I'm good for. I can break all this down for people to understand in simple terms. Okay, so color variegation, I just mentioned it. It's a huge concept where I say on a 12 by 16 painting, I would say every 1.5 inches or so, do a little shift of color. Look at those rocks. There's no way on earth you're going to see those oranges, those purples, and those greens in those rocks. But paintings is a play. It's not about representing things. It's about playing with color. So this is very painterly. And look at all the variety of shifts of cool and warm colors in those rocks. You know what? They're not even rocks, to be honest. They're not even rocks. They're just shapes, abstract shapes that collectively appear to be a group of rocks. Very different than a photograph. If you look at this normally, they just have some gray, boring rocks. Okay, become disciplined and learn to negative paint. In other words, you put indentations within the foliage clusters. My rule of thumb is, if I take a bush like this, it's 1/3 dark, 2/3 light, or vice versa. That helps you too. It's a 1/3, 2/3 principle. This is just a simple painting where I just use Prussian blue and the ochres to get my different variety of greens. But all these concepts have been applied. Graceful line. This is the focal area there. That's about it. Yeah. Okay, where do we place a focal point? Again, we talk a lot. We hear a lot about focal points, but what is the best area? And I've broken it down to, you got 4 possibilities. Usually the focal point is going to be placed, the focal area is going to be placed in the tic-tac-toe thing. You do it in little like squares like this, and normally you locate it here, 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 or here. Well, the best spot is, the best place to put a focal area is, and this has got the 5 stars. This has 4 stars, this has 3 stars, this has 2 stars. And the reason why I'm assigning more stars to this one, it's because we read from left to right. So in other words, when you're doing a painting, you have to you go through the visual movement, the rhythm, everything, right? Like over here, like in this composition here. Oops, I went too far on that. Oops, again. Let me get rid of some of this. Okay. Anyway, just enough for you to see. So I placed this at the 5 star. So this is at, this focal area is at the right hand side of the painting on the top quadrant, which means that I can move the viewer all the way from the foreground, take the viewer for a nice visual trip, deposit a few Hansel and Gretel cookie crumbs in the forest on my way there, take you finally to here. If I put the lighthouse on this side, then we don't read that way. It's not such a great place, because now we're too close to where we start reading. We want the focal area to be placed where we finish the sentence, not where we begin the sentence, which is normally at the top. So that's why I've designated that when you're thinking about where shall I place the focal point, there are your different evaluations for it. That makes sense, right? If I put a focal point right at the front part of the painting, then my incentive to go deeper into painting's not there anymore, because now I'm all distracted and I'm glued to all this area here. So what am I going to do over here that's going to be interesting? The idea is to use all this to usher the viewer all the way to the end. Okay, don't only think about, because you always hear or read about a focal point. It's not just a focal point. You can create focal points, several, as long as one of them is predominant. So this is the predominant focal area, right? Then we have a secondary one, and then we have another one. So, and just as long as one is predominant, the second one is more subordinate, and the third one even more subordinate. You can put several in the painting. Reflected light, a huge concept as well. It enriches your painting and helps you establish color harmony. If I don't put this yellow at the bottom of the cloud, then you're gonna feel that there's a disconnection between the sky and the ground, because I have all these warm colors down here, and I have, how do I make these whitish, in quotation marks, clouds work? That they communicate together, color harmony. I bounce these yellow ochre colors into the bottom of the clouds. You're not going to see this with the eye, but it works very well in paintings. That's why you just can't paint what you see in plein air painting, because what you see is just a blue-gray kind of cloud without any reflected light in it. But in a painting, you need it. So you always find reasons to bounce colors back and forth into different areas. Rocks, in the sides of rocks. And when you bounce colors, they should always be in the shadow part, not in the highlight part. And I know I'm going fast here because we try to get these YouTube sessions in a limited amount of time. My classes that go on for 5 hours during the day, it gives me all the time in the world to give more examples, to talk about it more. But I'm sort of rushing to get all this information in. Here's an example of reflected light. Take the cliff. Look at the purples, by the way. Color variegation over here. Subdued foreground. Goes on and on. Now it's big. Okay. Let's just save the document. All right. So you can see here, look at this rock, this cliff. It's an abstract shape, but you can see darker, warmer, cooler, lighter. Little touches of purple here and there for enhancement, but the trick is put reflected light. When you put the reflected light here, you get the gradient plane. It's called reflected light, but you wouldn't see it anyway in nature. Okay, another huge concept. Create a center, a rest area. Now, as a self-critique, in this painting above, there's something that bothered me about it when I did it. I know what it is. It's busy. Why? Because I don't have a rest area. I have a little itty-bitty one, but not enough. This still has a lot of activity going on in it. There's a little bit of a rest area here with almost nothing happening, but not enough to satisfy my expectations. So this painting has one downfall. It's missing a rest area. If it had that, like if I were to make this bigger here and get rid of this big rock here and put like a little pond or something in there, that would have worked. But anyway, I let it go because you can't have everything perfect. You've got to be forgiving in your artwork. But this one definitely has it. So we got that busy cast shadow. But right in front of these buildings over here, all this is like there's a note of silence. That's my rest area. Incidentally, look at the background. All wet on wet, right? Pointers. See, we keep recirculating that same information. Usage of purples. Gradient plane. Goes on and on. Color variation in the shadows. Purple, blues, greens. There's a rest area here too. Very clear one. Right in here. One way to look at it is pretend you got a stage and you got the actors, right? And the stage, like you're in a theater. All the seats are down here. And the actors are over here. They're not standing on the very edge of the stage. They're somewhat deeper inside the area. So this right in front of these actors where the stage is, that would be your rest area. Okay, ensure a well-designed abstract shape by having two opposite sides that are obviously different. I mentioned this already, but I think it's such an important concept. Let's do it again. Look at this shape. We imagine this as a silhouette. I really like this tree, by the way, this pastel, the colors and everything. But the reason I know why I like it is because I take an imaginary line down the middle, compare side A with side B. They're obviously different. Okay, paint evergreen trees in a group known as a mass. Vary their height, width, and shapes. So I've seen so many paintings of with evergreen trees, even done by top-notch professionals. And for some reason, they just don't vary, in my view anyway, they don't vary their evergreen trees enough. And I think that what's happening is you're just cloning, and cloning becomes a downfall in a painting. So if you look at this area here, every evergreen tree is different. It's got a different height, a different width, and the boughs are reduced. Okay, another neat concept, create two different corners. This I did make it up. This is not a result of reverse engineering. This corner is different than this one. This is going to help you decide things, because if you're going to have like white clouds and blue sky, you say, well, where do I put the blue sky and where do I put the white clouds? So it's easy to determine that. One corner has the white cloud, the other one has the blue sky. One corner has the sage brushes. These are, of course, very watercolory suggested sage brushes. They're not even close to realism. Whereas the other side doesn't have any sage brushes at all. Okay, let's move on here. It's starting to building blocks. Okay, and reconvert everything into abstract shapes. This is called Lunch Creek in Glacier National Park. If you look at the abstract quality, everything is built in abstract shapes. There's no realism in it at all. So it gives you that design factor. Look at the rocks. Look at the mountain at the back, the bushes. Everything is just designed in abstract design shapes. So you're reconverting everything into puzzle pieces. When I'm doing a painting, I'm imagining assembling a puzzle, but every piece of that puzzle is an abstract design. Okay, this is not such an important thing, but it's useful. I overplan always, so I'm sure I'm not short of time. But my concept here is to say, there's a principle that says the smaller the object is, the lighter the dark should be. The larger the object is, the dark side can be darker than the one next to it. What I'm talking about specifically here, make this bigger for you. Let's say you're going to approach this scene in plein air, and you see the rocks, right? First of all, these darks are going to be exaggerated. The naked eye would not see them that dark. But the principle is, if this is smaller than this dark will be less pronounced, and this one would be more pronounced. So if you're going to paint two balls, a billiard ball and a bowling ball, they're both black. The bowling ball can be darker than the billiards ball. Where a dark shape meets a lighter shape, the value shift is quite noticeable. Soften the edge, no matter where this appears. This was applied to the bush at the left and the tree at the right. So that means if you have a big value contrast here, when it meets this area there, in a photograph, that's going to be hard-edged. So what you do is you soften it so it doesn't appear like it's just floating on top. So this here is darker, meets the lighter grass. Again, subdued foreground. Goes on and on, right? Oh, discordant color in here. Look at that purple. Look at this discordant color in here. All these little touches really enriched. A little cerulean blue barn door there. Okay, this you want to write down. This one's important. Do not abruptly stop an eye flow. It's like, I would equate this to when you're listening to music and someone comes into your room and flips the switch and turns off your stereo. Why are you doing that, you'd say? So if you notice that all the songs that you hear on the radio or wherever, the volume starts to taper off slowly. It's called fading out. So knowing the idea about fading out is the same thing when you're creating an eye movement. Otherwise, it's slamming on the brakes. So you go like this, boom, you create this nice visual path here. We got some nice melodic, graceful lines. Keep moving. But I know I have to stop it sooner or later. But look how neat this is. I stop it there, but instead of just putting pure blue snow or white snow where I'm slamming on the brakes, I put a little puddle here and then a little one over here. So now you're gradually slowing down the eye movement. Instead of boom. Same thing over here. You follow this stream over here. A little bit of a speed bump. Because remember, the idea is to move the eye slowly, gracefully, not quickly. I don't want to hit a brick wall here, so I continue the river in between. So I'm zigzagging you everywhere here. And once we're that far in the distance, it doesn't matter anymore. Okay, we still got a little bit more time. Am I saying it all, Jude? Yeah, Jude is saying, hey, you're telling them all. Well, that's the way I am. You know what, Jude? This is going to be documented. It's going to be on YouTube forever. So I really want to give my teaching eagerness is I know this information will not come twice. I'm sure that some of you that are in this group today have wandered all over YouTube and read books and taken workshops. You got to acknowledge something. Be fair. A lot of what I'm saying, you've not heard of it before and not verbalized. Maybe you've seen it, but not where you say, okay, he put his finger right on it. So this is going to be here perpetually. And I want this, as a legacy, I want this to be documented so people are going to hear something that they've never heard before. And of course, in my classes, you see the application form because you can see all the paintings there, right? Honestly, just look how many of these paintings are really working. It has to be for some reason, right? I'm supposed to be able to meet the tires are supposed to meet the pavement. That means I'm supposed to paint or practice what I preach. So if you're liking the paintings, that means that these principles that I'm applying are working. Therefore, you might want to just take some classes with me, and so you can learn these secrets that you probably did not know before. A lot of these are not just my techniques. A lot of professionals implement this, but they just do it by instinct. But they can't verbalize it. They just do it because it looks good. Not all of it. Some of I invented it, but a lot of it is just what other professionals do. But how are you going to know that? Okay, planning masses, setting the stage for the actors. I'm going to try to go through this. Let me see. I want to do this last. Let me cover this other information first. Okay, no, I'm pretty close. It's going to be good. We're going to be good here. We're going to finish probably a 2-hour session will be good. All right. This is really cool. When you approach a scene, now a camera creates a viewfinder, right? It isolates it into a rectangle. But let's say you're outdoors and you're plein air painting. This is the first lecture I would give any time in a plein air session. Everything goes into the infinite. So where do I crop? How do I judge? How much sky? How much mountain? How much land? So I've come up with a really neat formula where you break it down to 3 or 4 masses. 1, the sky. Like I believe, it sounds very technical what I'm saying, but once you learn it, it becomes quite simple. There's a simplicity in my complexity. The complexity is because you probably have not heard these things before, but the simplicity is that once you digest it, it's very applicable right away directly to your paintings tomorrow, right off the bat. So I break it down to 3 masses. Sky, lake, sky. Well, okay, here it says, what should I do? Okay, I break it down to 3 masses. The sky, the vertical mass. Okay, let me convey this. Sky. You can see I'm all excited, right? I get all excited when I teach. Sorry, guys. Vertical mass, I love it. And then the horizontal mass. It's a very simple formula. In this case, we can add the 4th one because this is pretty light because it's further back. But in general, you just think about 3 masses. Okay, once you've done that, you say, one out of those 3 masses should take up the most square inches in your painting. The rest should be subordinate. So that's where you decide and say, shall I devote my painting to 66% sky? Shall I devote my painting to 66% vertical, which means evergreen trees and cliffs and mountain? Or should I devote my painting to the horizontal mass? And the answer is this. Whatever has the most visual richness is where you dedicate most of the square inches of your masses. Let's see if that works. If we look at our sky, we really have no visual richness because all these little squares just repeat themselves, so we have it's void of information here. The horizontal mass is also quite repetitive. If we put this on a chessboard analogy, we put square by square, you pretty much have a repetition of visual information. It's not rich enough. However, all the goodies are packed in here. That's where all the visual richness is. Therefore, my decision would be to do this painting and give the vertical mass the most square inches, and the rest becomes subordinate. In this case, I don't think the sky needs that much attention, so we can cut that down and just make sure that the mass of the sky and the horizontal of the lake are not the same. So I crop it and I end up with that. See? All my visual richness is there, and the rest, the water has been minimized because, again, if I look at this in a chessboard analogy, I need to make sure that in every square, you can see this in my book, by the way, Landscape Painting Essentials. In every square, there should be visual richness. This square, this square, this square, this square, this square, this square is about the same. So therefore, I'm going to cut that down because I don't have all that. I have all that beautiful play over here. So this is the way this composition is going to work. Same thing. However, I can think of several options. If I enrich the sky, so because remember, if I'm plein air painting or even with the photograph, I don't have to take that photograph at face value. This is one option only. The other option would be to take this and say, okay, I have a very beautiful cloudy sky. I'm not really interested in painting the mountain this time. I want to create that vastness of the open sky. Now I gave the sky pretty much the 66% of my retail space. Another thing is, don't limit yourself to the proportions of the shapes in the reference. You can actually stretch things. So why do I have, just because after I crop the sky and the water doesn't mean I have to respect the size of that mountain. I can take this mountain and redesign it and make it bigger. So it takes up that space. I can take these evergreen trees and make them smaller. I can make this bush smaller. If I make this bush smaller, then the mountain grows more, right? If you cut someone's hair, the ears will grow. Okay, the last thing is, I'm going to give you some tricks here. This is easy and fast. Method to assess a finished painting. So how do you know when a painting is done? Or how can you assess it and do a self-critique? I come up with 6 principles here. Number 1, flip the painting horizontally. So let's take this one, for example, and do a self-critique. So that's the original design. And at the end, I say, okay, do I need to do some more tweaks on it? Finishing touches, what do I do to make it work? Let's flip it. When I flip it, for you, it's not going to make any difference because for you, you're getting a fresh view of both paintings anyway. But if I've been sitting in my studio doing this painting, let's say for 3 hours, I become so acquainted with it that I might not see some of the errors, if you can call that errors. But after 3 hours, if I flip it, I have a mirror in my studio, a small mirror, and I put it in front of me and I get my back to the painting so I can see it, a flipped image. I can catch things. I can catch shapes that don't work. I can catch clones. I can catch lines that are not working. So that's one way to assess. Flip it. Next, bring it down to a thumbnail. You'll be surprised how many symmetrical shapes that seem to be abstract or asymmetrical end up looking symmetrical when you bring it down to the size of a poker card. That's important because when people are looking at a painting on a wall, let's say you have a 12 by 16 painting on the wall and you're 15 feet away, it will look like a poker card in front of you So you are going to see a thumbnail version of that painting if you're 15, 20 feet away from it. So it's important. It also has to survive and look good on a small format. Then you turn it into black and white. Convert it into black and white because you can see your value structure. I can see, for example, if this tree is the value is too light, if it's distracting me. Is the sun shining enough? Do I have a gradient plane? That's very good. When you convert your painting to a black and white, it's excellent to determine if you have enough, if your gradient planes are working. So I need to go darker to lighter, which I can see here. I have darker to lighter. This is slightly lighter here. It's not going to show up as much, obviously, in a black and white photograph, but I can see if my water reflections are too dark, because one of the principles of water reflection is whatever is dark on dry land becomes lighter in the water. Whatever is light on dry land becomes darker in the water. So I can see by converting this into a black and white photograph, are my reflections too dark? Are they competing with the dry land? If they are, then that would be stacking. Stacking effect means you have something under and something else that appears to have the same value or color. You want to stop that. So I can see perfectly well that my values are working here because the reflections are not as dark as the actual evergreen trees, which are really not evergreen trees. They're shapes. Because there is no evergreen tree on my painting, right? All right. Okay, another important concept, we're almost there, is when you visualize your painting on a black and white, you're going to catch things. So you don't rely only on color chroma or saturation of color to bring the richness, because your painting has to be competitive to the color version. Remember in the old years, at least like I said, I'm 65. I remember watching Flintstones in black and white. We used to be entertained in front of the fireplace and the TV on, black and white, watching programs, and we never thought of a color TV. That we enjoyed it enough to turn it on and spend hours watching it, correct? Some of you are probably in my same age group. Which means that seeing things in black and white, the brain is satisfied with it. So your painting has to be satisfactory to the brain, black and white, as well as in color. Don't think that don't only rely on color for it to work. And I'm going to give you a really good example. I feel that behind the lighthouse, that whole background is flat. It doesn't have that 3D look. I don't see progression. I don't see trees coming in front and the other ones going hundreds of yards behind. I just see it all flat. The way I can determine that is if I visualize it on the black and white, you can see that. I mean, there are some variations, but pretty much boring back there. So my painting won't survive on a color format. So you play with it. And now I did this with the evergreen trees with Photoshop. Put that into black and white. And now you can see it's competitive in black and white than it is in color. So let's do that one more time. See, that's flat. And because I converted it to black and white, I noticed that it needed more richness. See the difference? This versus this. That told me that it was too flat. We got two values there, right? We got a dark value and a mid-dark value. But we're missing another ingredient. We need to go up one more value to give that richness. There you go. Pretty cool, right? I had some examples of photographs here. I don't know if you guys want me to continue a little bit longer. I was just going to engage the panel a little bit and say, okay, let's look at that photograph. What do you see there that you would change based on what you learned today? I think we can take 10 more minutes to do that. Let's get some feedback from you. Let's say you were given this task to do that painting, what you just newly learned. What do you see that you would want to change there? It's going to take some time. Yeah, there's a 20-second delay there. Anyway, I'll go quickly through it. The two sides, the two halves are about the same. I mean, we do have some variations where this is cool, because if I had this mountain going all the way across, I probably would have taken this mist in order to satisfy the two different halves. But this, I would say, visually speaking, this area seems to be quite similar to that. And there's no question that all this is the same on both sides. So you don't have two distinct halves. So this photograph goes into the garbage. What this one has right is the line structure of the rocks. However, we have a semicircle. That has to go. So you want to take some dips there. You come in and you dip in and you do the little bit of a melodic line. What does this have right? Just by nature, this time really cooperated with us and gave us a nice graceful line on the edge of this evergreen tree. So what I'm trying to say here is that if nature is providing you with a good shape, which is rare, there's no sense distorting it or redesigning it if it works. What for? We have a nice melodic line here. That works fine. See the beautiful staircase effect? But this is not working. We have a semicircle, so we got to find a solution to that. Here we have an example of a wavy line. The eye is moving too quickly, slower than a straight line. Nevertheless, it's still too wavy. So the eye is moving somewhat too quickly. So the solution to that would be to take the tree like this, come down, make a dip, come up again, and create the roller coaster effect. We also have a straight line here. That's going to move the eye too quickly. The sailboat's not good enough to offset that. How do we? So once you've identified these problems, now you know what to do with it. Well, I can probably take some of these rocks, put in front. I don't have to respect that. Nothing says I can't put some rocks in here to create a melodic line and slow down that straight line. So on and so forth. What about this? What do you see? This one's pretty obvious, right? Look at the shapes of those trees. Take an imaginary line down the middle, compare both sides. You have completely equal sides. So you have to redesign all that. Straight line over here. No reason why you can't bring these rocks forward. You got a straight line over here. You can have some overhanging flowers or something to slow down that eye over here. So that's how you use all this information and put it into practice. Zigzag line here. Top, throw in some deciduous trees. This line is moving diagonal too quickly. Take a bite into it. Go like this, bring it down like that, create your roller coaster effect, do something with sandbank, this sandbank over here, and so on and so forth. And I think we're about done. This here doesn't have a rest area. If I paint that at face value, there's no rest area. Okay, just a minute. Okay. So I would have to get rid of some of those rocks and add a rest area, which means an area of water that's at peace with no movement in it, no waterfalls, no foam, just solid blue water, and create that stage that we talked about earlier. This is moving the eye too quickly. Cast shadows would fix that. And have some of the grass grow right onto the road, and don't make it into a paved road, make it into a dirt road where you can allow the grass to grow over it. See, that's how you do it. This has too many zigzags. So you change that. You look for an evergreen tree. You can actually do what I call a Frankenstein composition, which means you take this tree and beam me up, Scotty, on the USS Enterprise, take that tree, and beam me down, Scotty, onto planet Earth and put that tree right in here. Okay. So we are done. And I would love to see you guys, all of you, and your friends that you recommend these classes to, this coming Saturday, day after tomorrow. Registration is open at artistnetwork.com, artist with an S. You'll find it there. I think they've been posting the link there. Not, I'll post it again. Let me put it up for you. Here's all the course information. Right there. Follow that link. $14.99 for 5 hours. And of course, I'm going to say more things than what I just said today. I would bring in the average compositional techniques as well, not just the ones that you haven't heard. We throw it all. We're going to throw the whole kitchen sink at it. So you're going to learn more. Okay. So that's that. With that, I think we're done. And just join my Facebook page where you can be in touch with the rest of the students. They talk with each other. Some of them made friends. Go to my website, improvemypaintings.com, and sign up at the newsletter so you get periodic updates of the courses. And finally, I'm just going to, just one more time, I'm going to show you the description of the course coming up. So that's the first, you can read this. That's the first visual, because I know pictures have 1,000 words. So this is better. This will be the subject that I'm going to paint next day after tomorrow, and this one. 2 paintings in 1 session, like I said earlier. Okay, my friends, I'm not going to say I hope. I know for sure that if you're new, you learned a lot today. Tell me if that's not true. You learned a lot of things. You say, oh my gosh, I haven't heard this before. This is really new information. Very practical. De nada, Manuel. Goodbye, everybody. I'll see you all day after tomorrow. How's that sound? So, hasta mañana. Well, I should say hasta pasado mañana.